It is time to invest in America. And today the White House is requesting just that, unveiling a massive $1.5 trillion infrastructure plan, arguing it will cut through a lot of red tape, boost the economy, and protect our borders. So the debate is on. Folks, hope you had a good weekend. We had a washout here in the Northeast. Yes. They're lining up in twos up here. I'm Bill Hemmer. Good Monday morning. Welcome to America's Newsroom. Morning, Sandra.
Good morning to you. Good morning, Bill. I'm Sandra Smith. The new budget proposal promising $23 billion for a new wall and beefed up border security. White House Budget Director Mick Mulvaney sitting down with Chris Wallace on Sunday.
This may be the most complicated budget anyone's ever going to do. Tomorrow what we're going to be doing, Chris, is we're going to be doing an update to our 2018 budget, which we released back in the spring, in order to bring it in line with the spending deal that was passed last week. Last year in the 2018 budget, we asked for some money for the wall. I think it was about $1.6 billion. We're asking for about $3 billion, I think, this year. We are assuming in our 2018 proposal that a DACA deal is done and that the border wall is funded.
Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn will be here in just a moment, but first, John Roberts is live from the White House on this Monday morning. Good morning, John.
Sandra, good morning to you. 11:30 this morning, the Office of Management and Budget will unveil the 2018-2019 budget, which includes in it that massive infrastructure program. The president tweeting about that this morning, saying, quote, "This will be a big week for infrastructure. After so stupidly spending $7 trillion in the Middle East, it is now time to start investing in our country." I'll give you the broad brushstrokes of the infrastructure program. It's $1.5 trillion in total. $200 billion of that will be money from the federal government, seed money, loan money. The White House pointing to the fact that programs like the Transportation Infrastructure Finance Innovation Act mean that one federal dollar will generate as much as $40 in project dollars. There's also $50 billion for rural infrastructure programs. That will be deliverable in the form of block grants to governors. It will streamline the permitting process to 2 years, basically have one agency take the lead in permitting, depending on what kind of permit they're looking for, and changes to trade education and licensing. It will expand Pell Grants for 2-year programs and allow licenses to be eligible across the country. So if you're a carpenter in California and you want to get a job in New England, that license will be able to transfer. Now, in terms of the overall budget, it includes an additional $300 billion for the military over 2 years. That was agreed to last week in Congress. $23 billion for border security, which would hire 2,750 Border Patrol agents and put $18 billion toward the wall over a 2-year period. It also includes $13 billion to fight the opioid epidemic. One of the most controversial parts of it, though, it cuts domestic programming quite dramatically in order to save $3 trillion over 10 years. Here's the budget director, Mick Mulvaney, on that yesterday. Listen.
Take the money that the Democrats want to put to these social programs and move it to things like infrastructure, move it to things like opioid relief, move it to things that are in line with the president's priorities, so that if it does get spent, at least it gets spent in the right places.
Mulvaney has also gone on to say that the budget makes hard choices, fund what we must, cut where we can, and reduce what we borrow. However, the budget agreement that was reached last week is going to push the deficit for 2019 to over $1 trillion. So, Sandra, difficult to see where they're reducing borrowing here.
All right, John, and on this Monday morning, what about the memo? Where are we with that?
Adam Schiff says that he is going to take the memo back to the FBI and let them take a look at it for certain redactions. The White House was worried before it got the memo last week that he was going to fill it full of sources and methods, things that either had to be redacted, which could lead to charges to the White House making changes, or that would cause the president to reject it, as what happened last week. The ranking member there, Adam Schiff of the House Intelligence Committee, maintaining that the White House is trying to cover something up. Let's listen to what Schiff said, and then the White House response. Listen here.
What's really going on here, Major, is the president doesn't want the public to see the underlying facts.
The president released the first memo. He declassified it because it did not reveal sources and methods. This report from the Democrats does not keep American lives safe. What it does is it reveals serious national security information that could, quite frankly, put our lives at risk, and the president is not going to do that.
And the president weighing in on this on Twitter over the weekend, writing, quote, "The Democrats sent a very political and long response memo, which they knew because of sources and methods and more would have to be heavily redacted, whereupon they would blame the White House for lack of transparency, told them to redo and send back in proper form." Another issue that the White House is going to have to address today in more further detail than it has so far is what did it know and when did it know about Rob Porter, the former staff secretary who was forced to resign last week in a cloud of allegations of domestic abuse. The president certainly didn't help when he tweeted out, quote, "People's lives are being shattered and destroyed by a mere allegation. Some are true and some are false. Some are old, some are new. There is no recovery for someone falsely accused. Life and career are gone. Is there no such thing any longer as due process?" The chief of staff, John Kelly, also taking heat for the way that this was handled over at the White House. I'm told, though, that John Kelly, even though he offered to resign, is not going anywhere. And now we're really kind of zeroing in here on the White House counsel, because he knew about this. He was actually warned about it to some degree by Rob Porter, that in the FBI clearance investigation, that his ex-wives were going to be saying things about him. According to the White House, though, Porter was not fully forthcoming to McGahn in terms of what the extent of the allegations were. And when that picture hit last Wednesday, that changed the whole equation. Sandra?
Still a lot of questions on that. Thanks for all the updates, John Roberts.
You bet.
I think we have to take the show to the White House, Sandra. I mean, every day, all day. Thank you, John. For more on the memo and the budget proposal, Republican Congresswoman from Tennessee, Marsha Blackburn, with me in studio. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Also running for the U.S. Senate from the volunteer state.
That's
so
right.
Good morning to you.
Yes.
Is there an honest DACA deal to be had in this Congress?
I believe that there is. I think the president has been more than generous. I'm one of those that says let's begin with no amnesty. Pardon me, no amnesty at all. And then let's begin to work through this process, secure the border, in-chain migration, in the visa lottery system, make certain that we do those things so we do not circle back again and continue having this discussion.
So if you got a path to citizenship, you could vote for that, even though you're saying no amnesty?
No, I said no amnesty. And
so
with the dreamers, there's a difference in dreamers and all the DACA enrollees. And Bill, I think that's an important distinction. There should be some way to work through the issue with the dreamers. For some of these individuals that use the DACA program to come to our country and they're in gangs or they're involved in drug trafficking or sex trafficking, those are not individuals that need any sort of accommodation.
So I'm just come back to the original premise then.
Sure.
Could you eventually do a deal that sees a path to citizenship for up to 2 million who are here if they clear the criteria that you're spelling out?
I say find an accommodation for them, but no amnesty. We cannot have individuals get in the queue in front of individuals that have been legally working through this process for years. I know families that have spent every dollar they've made, every dollar they've saved, and 10 years trying to get their citizenship through the legal process. It is completely inappropriate for someone to get in the queue in front of them.
Topic number 2 on the budget. Jim Jordan was ripping with Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday. He said the following. Watch here.
Heck yes. I mean, come on. When you get elected to do the right thing on immigration and you got a bill that they're talking about in the Senate maybe passing, that's going to hurt, I think, turnout, and going to, people aren't going to be pleased with that. And then when you increase spending, $300 billion, just grow government, run $1 trillion deficit, heck yes, that could hurt us.
Oh, that's a lot of conservative backlash. What do you think about Jim Jordan?
Yes. I voted for this because we have to fix the military, get them out from under the Obama-era oppression that has just cut. 50% of the planes of the Navy don't fly. At Fort Campbell in Tennessee, my constituents, they cannibalize one aircraft to make another one, get parts for another one to fly. That has to be fixed. When you lose 80 of your troops in training accidents, you have to fix this. So you do have to fix the military. Do you like the increases that are there? Absolutely not. Are we going to come back and do reforms and rework entitlements? Absolutely, and we ought to, because you have to get the spending down and get to the point that we can have a balanced budget.
He's suggesting Paul Ryan's in trouble on the right. Is he?
What people want to see is money spent appropriately. They do not want it wasted, and cutting out waste, fraud, and abuse, something I've worked on my entire career, is where the emphasis needs to be so that we get the right amount of spending into the right components. And I think Director Mulvaney is right when he says with the president's budget, come back and look at making those spending reductions in the domestic side and in the entitlements so that you yield $3 trillion in savings over the next 10 years.
That's a lot to get through. Two more topics quickly here now. On the Russia memo matter, it's hard to see a resolution to this soon.
I think we'll get a resolution.
From where?
Well, the Democrats seem to write a summary memo that gave specific sources and information. You cannot do that. You cannot reveal sources. And what you have to do is go back, redact that, and then pull it out, and then release it. I think both memos should be released so that the American people know what happened. It just seems
that the back and forth has no end. I think that's, I think that's what most viewers across America see.
You got it.
Last question here. How do you think the White House has handled the Rob Porter situation?
I tell you what, there should be a zero tolerance policy for domestic abuse. And we're going to see what the White House does with this week, but zero tolerance.
All right, Marsha Blackburn, thank you for your time.
Good to see you.
I'm out of time for now, okay?
Great.
Next time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Sandra was
Fox News alert on a deadly helicopter crash in the Grand Canyon. We're learning 3 people killed Saturday evening were British tourists. They were on board the tour chopper when 3 other British tourists, with other tourists, when they crashed. 3 were rescued, including the pilot. Witnesses describing the scene.
All of a sudden I saw smoke. People were gasping. There was 1 man and 2 ladies. They were severely burned.
The terrain where the crash occurred in Quartermaster Canyon is extremely rugged. It's only accessible by aircraft, and our first responders had a 20-minute hike to get to the scene.
Tours over the Grand Canyon were suspended following the crash. Investigators are trying to determine the cause.
Another alert, the conflict between 2 historic enemies now heating up already today. Israel issuing a stern warning to Iran's rogue regime after a weekend of airstrikes in neighboring Syria. We'll talk to a retired 4-star General Jack Keane about whether or not we are on the brink of another war.
Plus, Vice President Pence signaling a potential change in strategy amid the growing nuclear standoff with North Korea. We are live from Seoul, straight ahead.
And Democrats accused of playing politics in the push to release their own FISA memo. Where is that today? Peter King, member of the House Intel Committee, is live when we come back.
It was clear from the development of the Democratic memo from the very beginning that they packed it full of sources and methods. What they did is they said, look, you need to make some redactions and some technical corrections here, and we will get it out right away. Now, from that point, we've heard nothing but crickets. It was clear from the development of the Democratic memo from the very beginning that they packed it full of sources and methods. Their memo is sitting at the House Intelligence Committee down at the bottom of the Capitol waiting to be redacted. If they really wanted to get it out, they'd be down there all day yesterday redacting it, getting it back over to the White House so that the public could know what's in it. We actually want the Democratic memo out. We think it's ridiculous on the face of it. We think it's very political about how they attack myself, they attack Chairman Gowdy.
Well, he certainly said a lot in that interview. That is Intel Committee Chair Devin Nunes saying a lot on Sunday with Maria. Nunes wants Americans to see what's in their memo. So when will we see it? This man wants to see it too. He wants you to see it. New York Congressman Peter King, House Intel Committee. Sir, good day to you and good morning. Yeah, just back up one moment. You've seen the Democratic memo. Was there anything in there that was offensive that gave away sources and methods, sir?
Yeah, there were a number of things in there that, and none of it changes the substance of the memo. I want that memo out. But there are some indicators in there which would show our enemies how we're tracking them, you know, different methods that we have. But that should be easy to take out without in any way changing the substance of the memo. I want people to see the substance of the Democratic memo because I stand with the Republican memo. Nothing in the Democratic memo disproves anything we've said. The fact is the Democrats used, or the FBI rather, and Department of Justice used a memo paid for by the political opposition to get a search warrant, and without telling the court that. And that's the reality. No matter how they try to spin that, they never told them that Hillary Clinton or the Democrats paid for that dossier, nor do they show any underlying justification for the dossier.
It's a remarkable thing to see how much of a 180 you have with your colleagues on the Democratic side. And when we talk to you and we talk to others, it is completely the opposite. Here's Adam Schiff, and I'll ask you a specific question about this next one.
Sure.
The hypocrisy of this just kind of reaches out and grabs you by the throat. Here the Republicans write a memo which the FBI quite accurately describes as misleading and omitting material facts. The Department of Justice says it would be extraordinarily reckless to release this. And what does the president do? He says, I'm going to release it. Before I even read it, 100% I'm going to release it.
Well, I know you disagree with that, but I have a different question. Is Adam Schiff playing clean pool?
No, he's become Adam one note. Everything the Republicans do is obstruction. Everything the Democrats do is pure, and he's totally misstating the facts. What he's saying there about the Republican memo, the FBI went through it with a fine-tooth comb. The director and 3 of his top aides, they could not find one fact that was inaccurate, and they cannot find anything that threatened national security. There was one small issue on identifying someone, and that was taken out. It had nothing to do with the substance of the memo, but they, at the end, the memo that was released did not have a factual error and did not have any inaccuracies, and it did not in any way reveal any sources or methods or threaten national security. Now, obviously, the FBI and the Justice Department did not want the memo to come out because they disagreed with the conclusion. But there was nothing in the memo that they could say was inaccurate. And that is where Adam is totally misleading and totally distorting the reality. The Democrats,
so
we don't care what their conclusion is.
You don't think he's being honest about this? That's what your answer says there, sir. Do you stand by that?
He's not being honest on that. He's not being honest on that. He's not being accurate, put it that way. Maybe he believes it in his own mind that he's so caught up in this that he automatically believes the opposite of what's true. But listen, I can say we've had any number of witnesses in before the Intelligence Committee, and before you can take your last breath after the interrogation is over, the questioning is over, the Democrats are out at the microphone saying how the witness didn't answer questions, the witness was misleading, the witness has to be called back. They're on their agenda, and I can tell you, Bill, I've said this time and again, I've been on the committee at almost all of the interviews, listening to all of the major witnesses, and I have not heard one word yet showing collusion. And if you go back a week or two ago, all the Democrats are talking about was all of the sources and methods that we were disclosing, all of the national security risks that were in our memo. When the FBI looked at it, they cannot find one. And now, Adam has totally shifted, and now they want their memo out.
Yeah, quickly, 15 seconds left here. I asked Marsha Blackburn this. I don't think the American people see a resolution to this. I don't know how much they care just yet, but I guess we'll find out. Is there an end to this story?
There has to be. It has to end because, first of all, it's interfering with the process of government. It's interfering with the president as commander-in-chief. And I would say the same thing if it was a Democratic president. This has to stop. Hopefully our investigation will be over soon. Hopefully Bob Mueller will finish his. And I'm confident from all that I've seen that there will be absolutely no evidence at all of collusion between the Trump campaign, between President Trump and the Russians or anybody involved with the Russians. If there's anything, and I'm not accusing them, there's more cooperation between the Russians and the Clinton campaign.
Well, we're on standby to see that Democratic memo when it's ready. Thank you, sir. Peter King, the Republican from New York.
Thank you.
Sandra.
Stunning new surveillance video coming into our newsroom of a deadly plane crash that killed all 71 people on board. The latest on the investigation into exactly what happened here. Plus, new details coming in on the suspect behind the shooting deaths of 2 police officers this weekend.
Hi. So a dramatic 911 call has been released from the wife of an accused cop killer. 2 police officers were shot and killed in the city of Westerville, that's near Columbus, Ohio. This on Saturday, responding to a report of a domestic abuse, and this is the call to 911.
911, what's your emergency?
Please help, please help, please help.
What's wrong? Tell me what's going on.
He shot the police officers.
Your husband did it? Where's your husband now?
Again, that's the wife of the alleged suspect. The suspect now hospitalized. Meanwhile, a prayer service and vigil was held in Westerville on Sunday to honor the hero officers. President Trump also sending his condolences to those in Westerville.
Fox News alert a potential breakthrough on diplomacy between the U.S. and North Korea. Vice President signaling a shift in American policy in a new interview with the Washington Post, saying there's a chance for talks, but you got to keep the pressure on Pyongyang. Quote, the point is no pressure comes off until they are actually doing something that the alliance believes represents a meaningful step toward denuclearization. So the maximum pressure campaign is going to continue and intensify. But if you want to talk, we'll talk. Greg Palcott, live from Seoul, South Korea, with more on this. Hey, Greg.
That's right, Sandra. After a weekend of Korean Olympic diplomacy, some potential shifting to ease the tensions here. Yes, Vice President Pence in that interview saying that talks between North and South Korea, even between the North and the U.S., could be possible following, he says, that he got assurances from South Korean President Moon that pressure would be maintained on North Korea to rid it of nukes and missiles. This follows a virtual love fest between Moon and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's sister. They were together 4 different times this weekend, including at a concert Sunday night. She extended that invitation to Moon to come to Pyongyang for a summit. Remember, the vice president had a close but a cool encounter with Kim Yo-chung at Friday night's opening ceremony of the Games. Athletes from the North are participating with those from the South. Sunday night also finally saw a protest against the South's efforts to turn these games into the Peace Olympics. It was small, but it was symbolic of many here who are cautious about getting too close to the North. Now, Sandra, our own experts are saying a possible shift on talks from the vice president would be important, but we are already seeing other Trump administration officials qualifying it. Not an easy road to peace. Back to you.
Greg Palcott, thank you. Yeah, a lot of people talking about the back and forth happening there this morning.
Did you watch the Olympics over there?
I sure did.
Yeah. I think social media is killing my Olympics experience, by the way. I mean, really, you have to pay attention, shut it off to make sure that you don't blow it.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, correct. Right, but how about Red, the 17-year-old American?
Impressive.
I mean, really awesome stuff.
Wow.
So more on that coming up here. 9:28 now. Back to some of our top stories. President Trump saying that it's time to invest in America. The details on what he would like to see as the budget priorities coming up.
Plus, Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff calling out the president for holding the release of the Democrats' rebuttal memo, saying Republicans are intentionally misleading the American people. White House Director of Legislative Affairs Mark Short will be here to respond next.
Also, the games go on in the U.S. winning its first gold medal in South Korea thanks to this guy. He's got some flow, too. 17 years old. Check him out. 9:31, we are open for business after a long weekend, I am certain, for investors here and around the world. So the Dow up about a percentage point at the open here, 255, 57 points now for the open. So futures were pointing to a better open today after the whipsaw of a week ago. Which
2 minutes into the week.
Yeah, we're 2 minutes in, folks. Hang on.
Yeah.
But we were working on Friday afternoon, right, Sandra?
Mm-hmm.
And we saw a 1,000-point swing within the Dow for the second time in 1 week.
It was enough to make your stomach churn, that's for sure.
My, oh my.
Yeah.
So this was expected, but I really, if you listen to a lot of the smart people who follow this, we've entered a period of volatility that it's going to take a while before it starts to
Interesting, the gains this morning tied to the announcement of the infrastructure plan.
Yeah.
Big steel companies are up this morning. Big machine makers, Caterpillar is reaping some benefits from that announcement. So tie that into our next guest.
Yes, we shall.
All right. Well, President Trump unveiling his massive $1.5 trillion plan to revamp infrastructure in America this morning, which includes a budget layout for 2019, adding $300 billion for the military and $23 billion for border security, while increasing the number of border agents, funding for the wall and the fight against the opioid epidemic, and cutting domestic spending to save $3 trillion over 10 years. Mark Short is the Director for Legislative Affairs at the White House. Good morning to you, Mark.
Good morning, Sandra. Thanks for having me.
All right, so does this plan make good on the president's promises, his campaign promises to do this?
Well, your intro had a couple important pieces that we need to lay out. One is, yes, this is a delivery on the president's promise to reinvest in America's infrastructure. And the way that it'll work is that $200 billion in federal dollars will not be granted until state and local governments come forward with private investment to match it. But what we're also asking is that the permitting process be streamlined, because right now you hear the president talk about often that the Empire State Building took a year to build, but many roads across America today take 10 years to get permits approved. So we're asking for Congress's help on the regulatory front.
Let me ask you about what you just said, though, because relying on the state, city, and local governments in all of this, because the Wall Street Journal, Jerry Seib this morning, saying this is a gamble, and this plan counts on states to do the heavy lifting. And you're hearing also this criticism coming from Democrats this morning. Nancy Pelosi, she's saying that the president's plan shifts the burden on cities and states. How do you respond back to that?
I'm not so sure it's shifting the burden. I think what we're giving is states and local communities the opportunity to leverage federal dollars to invest in the projects that the federal government has not been able to do for years. I mean, the reason the infrastructure is crumbling is because the bureaucracy here doesn't enable us actually to move forward. So what we're going to do is to empower the states and localities to use some federal dollars to match it and to reinvest in their communities. I think that that's really, it's basically devolving power back to state and local governments as opposed to putting a higher burden on them. I think that's a federalist approach that generally conservatives appreciate.
It's a massive plan and it's a lot of money, and the president has gone on the record many times saying that our economy has not been able to grow like it could because of this crumbling infrastructure. Can you put a number to how much economic growth this type of spending will spur?
Well, Sandra, I'm not an economist, but I did sleep at Holiday Inn Express last night. So let me try to give you a little bit different perspective of the volatility you were talking about as you promoted this section. Yes, there's volatility in the market, but that's because the economy is already growing. We've had 3% GDP growth the last 3 quarters, and actually revenues came in at 5.2% higher in January to the Federal Reserve. So in fact, the economy is already turning a corner. The volatility you're seeing in the market is basically inflation expectations are moving up, which isn't all bad. When you had no wage growth and you had 1.8% GDP growth through the entire Obama years, and now people are seeing their wages increase, those inflation expectations mean there could be higher interest rates. And that's not all necessarily bad when you have that sort of growth. So the reality is the market volatility is reacting to the growth they're already seeing in our economy with expectations for even higher growth in the months ahead.
All right, so I want to move on to this back and forth on the memo. And I know this is something the White House is dealing with this morning because it was Friday that the White House and Chief Counsel decided to put out a letter saying we will not release that Democratic memo. It contained too much classified and sensitive information. Well, the top Democrat on the House Intel Committee, Adam Schiff, he responded to that over the weekend, and I want to get your take.
Sure.
The president doesn't want the public to see the underlying facts. What is revealed in our memo are quotations from the very FISA application that really demonstrate just how misleading the Republicans have been. Their goal here is to put the FBI on trial, to put Bob Mueller's investigation on trial, and the president is only too happy to accommodate.
He claims the White House is intentionally misleading the American people.
Sandra, I think the reality is that the White House is going to look forward to releasing that memo. Let's keep a couple things in mind. One is that Republicans voted in Congress to release both the Republican and Democrat memo. Democrats only voted to release their memo. So there is enormous hypocrisy here. What we've heard from the intelligence community is there are sources and methods in the Democrat memo that they do not want revealed. So the president simply said, I'm going to send it back to the House Democrats, ask them to clean it up, and then we'll go through the process of releasing it.
So what's Adam Schiff's goal then in saying something like that?
My assumption, Sandra, is this is all political. What this really is they intentionally put sources and methods in the document, knowing that the White House wouldn't be able to release it, and then they could basically go on TV and say that we were editing the document.
Is that the belief of the president?
That is our belief, but I think the president made the right decision to say, look, if that's the game you're going to play, I'm going to send it back to you. You clean it up. You work with the FBI. Send it back to us, and we'll be happy to release it.
Also, something else on your plate this morning is the president's response to Rob Porter, who left the White House last week amid allegations of domestic abuse from 2 of his ex-wives. And the president's response was criticized, but he also put out a tweet talking about a lack of due process for men accused of domestic violence and sexual misconduct. Is the White House standing by the president's comments and his response overall to this situation?
Well, Sandra, I think that the president, like all of us, were saddened and surprised by the revelations that came forward last week. Rob was a friend to many of us. He did a great job here inside the building. But we can have zero tolerance for domestic abuse and violence against women. And I think the president, in my conversation with him, has been very clear about that as well. So, so when the revelations came forward Tuesday night, by Wednesday morning, Rob had resigned.
And is he gone from the White House?
Rob is not here any longer.
Okay. All right, Mark Short, always good to get your take on things. There's so much going on already on a Monday morning. We thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Some more breaking news now. Overseas, new surveillance video released of a deadly plane crash in Russia. That jetliner went down minutes after takeoff from an airport near Moscow. 65 passengers and 6 crew members on board. They are all dead. Amy Kellogg live with the latest on the investigation today. Amy, hello.
Good morning, Bill. Well, Russian investigators seem to have ruled out terrorism, but at this point, Bill, they do not have a dominant theory about what brought that Antonov 148 plane down yesterday. They're looking at the whole range of possibilities: pilot error, mechanical failure, or something to do with the weather. Incidentally, Bill, last year was the safest on record for aviation, and this was the first major crash of 2018. And we're learning more about the victims, seeing heartbreaking images of family members in shock and indescribable grief as they gather in the airport their loved ones were supposed to return to. The pilot was an experienced one with 5,000 flight hours. Friends say he just loved the sky. The Saratov Airlines plane took off yesterday afternoon from Moscow's Domodedovo airport and disappeared from radar just minutes after takeoff. It was destined for Orsk in the Ural Mountains. Apparently, the pilot didn't even manage to make a mayday call. It crashed about 25 miles from the airport in snowy fields where rescue workers have toiled through the night. In some cases, in waist-high snow, Bill, they have found 200 body fragments. They believe it will be a good week before they finish all their work at that very difficult crash site, Bill.
Amy Kellogg, thank you. Updating that from London today. 20 minutes now before the hour.
Fox News alert on reignited tensions in the Middle East. Now Israel's prime minister says he's not backing down.
Iran seeks to use Syrian territory to attack Israel for its professed goal of destroying Israel.
Israel ordering airstrikes on Syria after intercepting an Iranian drone over Israeli territory. The potential impact from a weekend filled with conflict. Retired 4-star General Jack Keane is here.
Also, several media outlets taking a bit of heat over fawning over Kim Jong-un's sister at the opening ceremonies this weekend.
The little sister of little Kim still comes from a country where most of the people are